All right, well, hi, everybody. This is the LifePoint podcast. As you can see here, we have Stephanie, Matt, and Stephanie. For those of you that might be watching for the first time, Matt is our family pastor. He's married to Stephanie. You guys been married how long?
30 years.
30 years? How long have we been married?
31 in June.
31 in June. So I would say we've got 62 years of experience about talking about sort of marriage and dating. Now, we're not perfect, right?
Nope.
No. But the reason we're doing this is because I had planned to do a message at LifePoint where Stephanie and I were going to talk together and we were going to share some sort of advice to the next generation about dating. And that there was just such a busy week. We had a lot of things going on. We really couldn't get that done. So instead, I thought, this is better. Let's have all four of us kind of talk about dating and relationships and marriage. And we got some questions from the audience, and I've got quite a few here. And I figured we could just work our way through these questions. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Awesome.
That sounds great. So we're going to jump right into it with the very first question that we received. Honestly, controversial. We're going to start with controversy. This question, this person was not anonymous. Joel asked the question, is cheesecake a pie or a cake? So I figure let's get the controversy out of the way first.
Okay.
I mean, it is called cheesecake.
Doesn't have a crust like a pie would have, though.
Actually, that's what I was going to say.
The graham cracker
It actually
crust?
does have a crust, and a cake doesn't have any kind of crust.
Well, however, there are flourless cakes.
That's true.
And a cheesecake has no
Flour.
And you don't put it in a pie tin. You put it in a cake, a springform cake pan.
I have eaten cheesecake out of a pie pan.
That's not cheesecake. That's something
I am
else.
too. Out of a tin.
Look, I can't speak to the way that you do your culinary things in your houses. I don't eat my cheesecake out of a pie tin.
Well, let's just take a vote, and then we'll move on. Is cheesecake a cake? Raise your hand.
It's not.
You should be raising your hand. You're the one saying it's not a pie.
It's better than all. It's better than cake.
Not cake, not pie.
It's not pie.
You know what? I'll solve it right here.
What's that?
Cheesecake is a tart. That's actually what it is.
Okay, well, I think you. That's definitive as far as I'm concerned.
It is neither. It is a
neither.
tart.
I don't think it's a tart.
I looked it up. It's a tart.
I don't think so.
I'm just going to go with it's delicious.
It's better.
Yeah, because it's not. It's something about. There's only one. It's open-ended, which is a tart. You can put things on top of it, which doesn't make sense because I think, well, don't you do that with a pie?
Yeah, I was going to say, if that's your definition of a tart, then every pie is a tart.
It's a custard-based.
Here's what we're going to do.
No, it's not.
Everybody's clicked off of this video by now. We're going to move on to the important stuff because you could talk about this forever.
Look it up. It's a tart.
Let's jump into a good one here. Here's one of the questions that came in, and it's this: what do you do to balance extrovert and introvert needs in the stage of having very young children? This is actually not a dating question per se,
right?
But let's take it as if it is a dating question. How do you balance a relationship of an extrovert and an introvert? And I know that you had already said this is sort of something you guys deal with. So what do you guys think? How would you answer this question?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm an introvert. No, I'm the extrovert and Steph's the introvert. So we have always been fully the opposite in that sense. And we, while we've been married 30 years, we dated 6 years before that. So we had a lot of time of trying to figure that out. And I think really for us, I don't know what you want to say. You go ahead.
I was just going to say we finally figured out that it was about expectations. Like we finally figured out that as an extrovert, that meant that when we were around people, he gained energy and I was drained. So we had to agree on expectations before we go places. He would actually say, what's the signal or how much time do you think you can handle being out? And then we agree ahead of time or have an expectation ahead of time so that once my battery was empty, we would need to leave. But
to go plug her back in at home.
Exactly. But I never wanted to say no to a social event. So we would attend the social event with the expectation that we could.
Yeah, mine was I wanted to stay till 10 or 11. Hers was like, I'm done by 7.
10 or 11, you want to be the last person out the door.
So that's the way it was. So we, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that because we always talked about, even whenever I would do premarital counseling, it would be like, you got to communicate the expectation every time. And it has, sometimes it feels or sounds silly, but like when you're going out, when you're going to go do something, when you're going to do a family thing with each other's family, because there's expectations there. And so, yeah, communicate the expectations.
Yeah, I think if you could apply that principle to a lot of things in dating. Number one, obviously communication ahead of time, which isn't a bad, I mean, that's a good thing. And expectations. So when you kind of put those, it could be about spending money. It could be about your involvement in church. It could be about how much time you're spending at the office or at home. I think those are just good principles for dating, and then they roll over into marriage.
Which helped you practice the what's the word? The element of compromise. This character of compromise. So we had to compromise and figure out, okay, what's the expectation? Well, I want to stay really late. You want to go really early, but how do we meet in the middle, and what does that look like? I think the other thing that we did, and this was later in marriage, but it could be done in a dating scenario, and that's exploring about your gifts and your strengths and all that. So what we did at one point is we took a Strength Finder 2.0, and Strength Finder 2.0 was able to, it was nailed us, everything about us on the head, and part of it was about how I, react to things and how she reacts to things. So when we were dating, I used to think, oh, you just don't want to do that because you're a stick in the mud, right? But really, part of it was she was avoiding the landmine, or because she needed to go and become re-energized by being at home alone with a book, kind of thing. And some time there. So when we went through that, it helped us. It helped me call out in her what I used to complain as a negative when we dated, to be a positive, to be a gift, to be something that is valued, and then the same thing.
Right. I see you taking me places, and I have to stretch and be out with people. And,
well, you even said at times, because I was so extroverted, you'd be like, why is he talking to that person like that in the drive-thru?
Yeah.
I mean, like, what? Goodness.
He doesn't know a stranger, that phrase?
Right, yeah.
That's
But I think what's important, too, though, is rather than looking at your partner's strength, or what I say, rather than looking at what you might see as a debility, like, she doesn't like being around people. That's actually not really, that's actually a strength.
Right.
And you have to see, you're looking out for the other person first. So I think I will take 3 things away from this. 1, communication. 2, expectations and managing those expectations. And then 3, putting the focus on what the other person needs before what you need. And if both of you are doing that, you're both going to be taken care of.
Yep.
Let me jump to the next one. This one is an interesting question. This person's a young guy, I'm assuming. He wants to know how to begin dating. How do you get started with dating?
Interesting.
Well, I think nowadays, leave the house. So you have to get out there. I think a lot of times we're stuck in our own environment. We're isolated. And so I think a lot of younger people are, whereas we escaped maybe in our generation, it was like we got to get out to go do things. You can do so much internally that I think you have to get external.
Get out. I would say, and I don't know how old this person is. You got to, depending on your age, you might need to get permission from your parents to start dating.
Right.
I don't know if you're 15 or 16.
Yeah.
And then I think the best advice I would give to a young Christian person with dating is start dating in groups.
Yes.
Start dating in groups. Do stuff in groups.
We did that totally in our youth group, and we would just we were just talking about this today in the car. We were like, we went out more, and that's how we became really friends first, and that's why I feel like like nowadays our ministry is better because we were friends first, but we group dated. We were just going out with friends and hanging out.
It takes a lot of pressure off.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
you don't have to keep the conversation going. And also if you've set any guidelines about your physical or emotional selves, you know, as a couple, it's easier to maintain in a group.
Right.
So we really enjoy
And
it.
I
then you get
think-
to see the other person interacting with other people
That's true.
in a group and scenarios.
Right. And I think that, I mean, even though we were dating, we still did tons of stuff with our friend group,
Right.
which was nice.
Well, that's one of the reasons to be involved in like a church youth group or something, because there's a natural group already. It's just not your friends, but the people
Right.
that you go to church with. And I think, you know, that's and we're talking about getting started, because I'm assuming maybe
Right.
this is 16, 17-year-old, something like that.
Okay.
Like you said, no, not the pressure of going somewhere and having to
Right.
hold the conversation up all by yourself.
Right.
I would say the only piece of advice I would give to a young guy is make sure all the other guys that go in the group date with you are not as strong and handsome as you. Right? No, I'm just kidding. That's a total joke. No, that would be my advice on how to begin. But here's another good follow-up question, because a lot of young men, this one comes from a guy, how do you get confidence if you don't have confidence? And I'm assuming we're talking about self-confidence when it comes to dating.
Sure.
Any ideas from a woman's perspective? What would you look for? What kind of confidence would be appealing to you in a young man?
Well, for me, it's important not to be overconfident.
Oh, good.
Right, so self-assured, so with it, so I've got it under control. You know, if I'm going to be able to read a falseness,
right.
I'm not going to be interested in you anyway. I would
Right.
prefer someone who is maybe unsure or timid, or like, you know, I've not gone to this movie theater. I don't know exactly where we're going in, or anything like that, or I don't know how to play putt-putt, or I'm not good at it.
I think you brought up a good thing. You don't have to know everything to be confident.
Yes.
No, yeah.
Yes.
Right? You need to be willing to.
That's why she's dated me.
You don't have to know everything to be confident.
Right.
Right. I think a lot of if a young man doesn't have self-confidence, it's because he's worried about rejection or things like that. And I would say rejection is just kind of part of the process.
Sure.
And it isn't necessarily a negative thing. And by the way, it's not always about you.
Mm-hmm.
You're not always getting rejected because of you. Mm-hmm. It might not be the right fit for that person, maybe not the right time for that person. So I think, that leads into some self-confidence. What would you say? What do you look for? Or not now, because you're not dating. But when you were dating in high school and when we started dating in college, what kind of confidence did you look for?
Well, I mean, I like somebody who's confident and they have ideas and, don't mind saying hello and starting conversations. Like I like that, but I also looked for somebody who wasn't, you're so lucky to know me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like that kind of
Yes.
confidence is just like super unattractive.
Very.
And
An
but
element of cockiness that's
Yeah,
like
that's what Steph is saying.
Right.
Overconfidence
Right.
is not good.
and and also I think that you can say, here's, I think we'll do this or this, but then also go, what kind of things would you like to do? Do you have any favorite places that you like to go? Or, get some feedback on that. And if they don't have any, then make a plan. And I think, some of that is, it's attractive to see somebody who's willing to make a plan and take a risk.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah.
And
And then
if-
the flexibility to,
Right.
to
And
if
and
it's
you're-
not the right thing or place or whatever, you
And if it
change.
doesn't work out, that's okay.
yeah.
You just move on to the next. I mean, that's hard. I get that. And it often, I would say, probably falls to the guy. But I think more and more young ladies are making, the first attempt at some sort of a date. But not everybody's a match. And so, I don't know, maybe it's better to know that sooner
Yes.
rather than
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
I also think that regarding how do you start, and that is you have to start.
Right.
And you have to go through the failures of, sometimes you don't realize what you want until you've looked at
Right.
and you've been with people and you've gathered enough information and you're like, that's not what I thought, that's what I was looking for
Right.
in a person. or the personality or whatever, but it's not. And so sometimes you have to go through those things and kind of live life and experience to even gain the right sort of confidence to be able to.
Right.
Yeah,
And
maybe
that-
you're saying experience to a certain extent in
Right.
terms of, going through some rejection, having some dates that don't go that great. That is going to build your confidence because you're going to know what to do different.
I think we've talked about this also, is that if you only knew what you knew now, then you would realize none of that is as big of a deal as you feel like it is in that moment.
Right.
Like you wouldn't worry about what you were wearing so much, or where you went on a date, or I don't know, just all of those things that are so huge when all those emotions are involved. Like later on, as you've gained experience in your life, you're like, oh, I wish I'd known that I could walk right up to that person and introduce myself and see if they wanted to have a conversation. Like some of that, it's if you could be old-minded, like know the stuff that you knew when you're older, and then but get it when you were younger, that confidence would be there.
Yeah, but you have that confidence because you've experienced so much of life. It's
Right.
almost
Right.
like
That's where experience. Well, you don't realize how much power you actually have to influence or to get an actual date.
Right.
I remember
And
I had this crush on this girl. I probably was like in 9th grade, and my cousin and I, we both had sort of crush on these two girls. And my dad was like, well, just call her on the phone. I'm like, what are you talking about? Are you insane? You can't just call somebody on the phone. He's like, what? Things have changed. But, easy for him to say. But when you're 15 years old, that's like the last thing in the world you want to do. But, I do think as simple advice as it is, I think Matt's point, to start, you have to start.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, you figure it out along the way. And you will probably realize at one point in your life, like, okay, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was, but that's just part of growing up.
Right.
Well, let's handle a more challenging question.
Okay.
More challenging question. So it sort of speaks to marriage, but I think there's a dating element in it. We were talking about being unequally yoked on Sunday in my sermon. And this person writes, what happens if you find out that the person you're already married to, you're unequally yoked with that person? Right? So you got married, and now you're realizing, oh, we're not equally yoked.
Or do you think that they're asking that you were a Christian and they pretended they were, or you just didn't think that was important before you got married, and so you didn't consider that before? Or that you've become a believer after you got married, and what would be?
I think it could be any of those things. I wonder if it has a little bit to do, because I've got some feedback from the sermon on me saying, there's more to being equally yoked than just being Christians, both being Christians. Like one person might be a very strong believer while the other person's sort of struggling. And I didn't say that was unequally yoked, but the point is you want to find somebody that kind of is at the same level, or at least going the same direction as you. So I think it could be either of those things. Let's start with the first one. You're a believer, and the person you got married to is not a believer. What do you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in talking about the dating side, obviously you're already beyond that.
Right.
So
Right.
it's a different
In terms of the dating side, try not to get into that situation.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're pre,
Avoid it.
then start evaluating now. If is this the person that I ready to start the rest of my life journey with?
Right.
And so that's maybe a little bit easier to answer, which is don't jump into the connection with that.
But if you're already married, I mean, from a biblical standpoint, you can find this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7.
Right.
You stay married.
Right.
To the best of your ability, understanding that if your spouse is not a believer, that in some way, mysteriously through the power of the Spirit, that marriage is still sanctified because of the one person. And I think you stick with it if the other person's willing to stick with it. And if the other person's like, I don't want to be married anymore, the Bible says, you can let that person walk away. So I think if you can stay married, you pray for that person, you model your spiritual relationship with Christ as much as you can. And, it might be 10, 20, 30 years or something, but they may come to know Christ too.
Right.
But if you're just not on the same page spiritually, I think that is a more challenging sort of question to answer.
That's probably, levels of maturity.
Right.
Yes.
Quite honestly, that one may have and experiences. You've experienced more. You see and understand what God wants you to, how God wants you to mold you and chip away all the bad stuff on you and make you more in His image. And that's a level of probably maturity that's unequally yoked.
Yeah.
That another person may not have that in their life.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think there's good examples of this in lots of churches, but you'll meet somebody and they attend church regularly, but you've never seen their spouse.
Right.
And sometimes their spouse is a Christian, but they got burned by church or there's some reason, and so it feels a little unequal there. I wish there was a really good, easy answer to this question, but there isn't. Like,
Right.
No.
you're married,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a holy thing. And I think you might end up, sort of drawing spiritual power from the Lord to get through that situation that may be difficult because the other person is not at the same level or doesn't desire to be at the same level, or is dealing with some things that are making your spiritual life difficult. I think you have to stick with it. I think this is where the support of a church family is critical, right? Because you're going to need that kind of support for that too. And I think also just need to be honest about where you are spiritually, where you want to be, and what you hope for out of that other person.
That's, again, to communicate the expectations
Right.
of where each goes.
And
And then introducing or trying to find couples maybe, who are equally yoked that you can hang out with, that can influence that other spouse member.
Yeah.
And they can kind of see what it looks like.
I don't know I don't know where the question comes from and things like that, but also I'm just looking at another side of it. I would think you would want to make sure that you, the person saying, I'm unequally yoked with my Christian partner, are you setting expectations? Are you setting things like, well, I'm better, I study more, I pray more, I serve more? Like, are you causing the rift there, or is it truly?
Yeah, that's a danger, isn't it?
Right.
Because now the other person is maybe getting turned off to spirituality because they're seeing you in a certain light.
Sure.
Right.
Well, and I think that, it goes back to the idea that the first question about introvert and extrovert,
Sure.
and understanding how different people are interacting with life because of the personalities that they have. And the same is true about expressions of Christianity, the
Right.
way that you are. So this person over here is like, doing all these outward things and all these, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the other person, who might have a much more quiet relationship with Christ,
Right.
that doesn't mean that you're unequally yoked because this person is more this person is quiet.
Right.
So I think that idea about, well, this way is the best way that you're supposed to be, and comparing it, well, that's the same thing as saying, well, extrovert is the way that you should be, and introvert, there's something wrong with you. And I think that's a
Sort
danger.
of like spiritual extrovert versus a spiritual introvert, if there's such a thing.
Sure.
Could be.
It's hard to know. But again, the discussion and the dialogue between a couple to find out, like, where are you and what's going on? And
Sure.
how are we going to move in the same direction? And maybe we are moving in the same direction, we just don't realize it.
Or you might need help.
Or you might need
like
help. That's
counseling
a good thing. Yeah.
and someone, a Christian counselor to talk,
Right.
That's great
Right.
advice, and I'm glad that you said that because, I've always thought the best sort of advice you could give to a couple that's struggling is find a marriage therapist and talk to your pastor, like together, like not
Right.
all at the same time, but
Right.
sort of joint sessions, because you're going to get the spiritual encouragement you need, but then a marriage and family therapist has the tools to help you unpack some of the things that might be in that relationship
Sure.
that are, family of origin issues type things. But
And I think that would also be the value for a dating couple who wants to get married. You should do some premarital counseling
Yeah.
and hopefully work out some of these things ahead of time and avoid.
yeah, you might find out that it's a deal breaker because
Right.
their values are not exactly the same as yours. Maybe they're similar. This
Right.
person says they're a Christian, but but they don't really do anything about it. It's just sort of an identity thing versus their life.
And a promise right now is not going to become a reality later. Someone who says,
that's true.
oh, as soon as we get married, then we'll be able to go to church together and we'll be able to do this. If they're not in it now, I've not seen it happen where it shows up later.
No, especially like it's almost, it's not exclusive, but to the young woman who's dating the guy who says that, once they're married, he's going to go to church. He's not. I'm sorry to say. Like,
if he's not practicing, don't wait for the promise.
Right.
No, and because there's a lot of things that men and women will say to each other just to stop the argument or to move on to the next subject.
Sure.
And that can be one of them. Okay, we got 2 more questions.
Yes, dear is the other one.
What do you do if your family has discernment, that's in quotes, about someone that you're interested in after everyone has just met the person and their input is not what you want to hear? Sounds like this person's interested in a young man or young lady, brought him home to the family, and the family now is saying, no, we have a discernment. This isn't the right person for you, and that wasn't the info you hoped for.
There's so much
so many pieces
in that, because it could, you could take that either way. Like, some people can be, over exaggerate things in their family, and then sometimes it's a very real discernment warning that you should be looking at this, because we're blinded by sometimes our feelings and love, and I want to be with this person, and so we don't get to hear others. And that's,
I would also think that, again, we don't know the age. If we're talking 15 and you're saying your parents kindly use the word discernment and they said no, well, there's your answer.
Yes.
You are a young adult or a teenager and your parents said it. That's basically the end of the conversation.
That's a good point.
But if we're talking someone who's 22 or 20, like they brought somebody home, and then I always think if you're raised in a Christian home, you want to listen to the discernment.
Right.
But as an adult, you are making the final decision and understanding living with the consequences of that decision.
Well, and how many times have they met this person?
Sure.
So once again, in that brand new situation, they may perceive something about that person which is not really who they are, because they're so nervous.
Sure. Yeah.
And so that could play in. So perhaps you listen, say thank you, and then as time goes on, ask them again, are you still feeling the same way? I mean, if it's, and perhaps they say one thing, but you've seen other things in like other life besides like coming home to family, and that nervousness can make people not who they really are.
You're saying you bring this young guy home and he's just not good in front of a crowd. And he doesn't wow anybody.
Right.
Versus, the person who's very slick and kind of knows exactly what to say, and is like, he's going to be mom and dad's favorite, but underneath. Here's what I would say. Like, number one, I would make sure that the discernment that's in quotes, we're talking about biblical discernment, right? So is there something scriptural behind this?
Sure.
Right. Again, if we're talking about teenagers, your parents, what they say is what they say.
Right.
But if we're talking about, okay, you're in your 20s and, you bring this girl home to mom, and of course, she doesn't like any of the girls you bring home because all of them are threatening to take her baby away. That's not exactly discernment.
Right.
But if there's some biblical discernment there, I think that's important. And then I would also, maybe the thing to say about this discernment thing is, okay, well then, what do your friends say? What do the people at church say? Because if you start to notice that, well, everybody's got generally the same opinion.
If there's a pattern.
There's a pattern. Yeah. And I know that Solomon says in Ecclesiastes that, if the wisdom of a council is a good thing. So if you have 7 or 8 people all kind of weighing in, you might have to kind of realize that it's not what I wanted to hear, but it is the right thing. Right. So I think, it's situational there, but if the discernment is biblical and these people truly care about you, probably should listen to them.
Right.
But I like what you said. Ultimately, you live with your consequences of your decision.
Right.
Yeah. And it could be for forever.
It could be for a very long time.
Right.
All right, last question. I thought this was a really, really good question. Very well thought out, and I think it's as far as dating goes, you can see that this is a relationship where this person wants to do the right thing. Here's what they write. When dating in a biblical context, I've always understood that you're prepping for marriage. I think that seems reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
I understand my partner isn't supposed to treat me like she's my wife in the premarital context. But in the spiritual sense, how do you know that she is the woman to marry if she's never able to deliver evidence of it in the way a wife does while we date? So he gives an example. So her priority is her family. How do I know that I'll become the priority once we're married? Of course, God is the ultimate priority, so we understand that. But on the earth, am I crazy, or should I assume that if she loves God, I will undoubtedly see the shift in priorities once we're married? So if I understand correctly, people are together. She's focused on her relationship with her family first at this moment because they're not married. But will she then change focus and put her focus on her husband once they're married? And how do you know?
Well, the answer is you don't know.
That's a whole. There's so much to unpack there, and there's so many layers that it could go any way. So that's a hard one to.
I would say
answer.
The fact that she's prioritizing family, that's a good step. Like that would seem like it would translate over to when she has her own family. Like it feels like it would.
I think so, as long as that priority is a healthy priority, because there's different ways to sort of prioritize your family. I'm assuming this is in a healthy way, like, I'm honoring my mother and my father.
Right.
Versus, no, I can't do anything on my own, so I'm leaning on my mother and my father because I can't take care of myself. But assuming that it's a healthy relationship, and I think what Stephanie says, you don't really know, but I think those are some clues that if the family understands, like I might look at the mom and dad to find out what their relationship looks like.
Right.
And the mom and the daughter.
Yeah.
I would look at that relationship.
Yeah, because is she attached to her family because they're modeling what's the right thing? Mm-hmm. And then the last thing I might say about this is it might take some time, though.
Absolutely.
Because you leave and cleave, like Genesis says, you're going to leave this family and join a new one or become a new family. But that's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, leaving one tribe to start your own is going to take. There's going to be some stumbling that happens.
Right.
It's going to be a bit of a transition.
And as long as the family knows and understands, we're now starting this unit. It's just we're now together, and now we're beginning this unit, and the couple understands that. You still love your family and there's still connections, but you also, like you said, you've now started this new family unit.
Right. And I think that's that communication that we keep talking about, that even when you're dating, to find out some of these things and what's important to you and what's important, in all these different situations, you can, I don't know, if you have values that are there, then you can kind of see where it might go in the future. Like I think they're indicators of where things are going to go.
I think the closer you get to marriage, I think you're going to start to see some of those beginning things transition. To me, and again, I'm assuming that this focus that the young lady has in her family is a healthy one, but I think that's a good thing. You're not supposed to be focused on your boyfriend overall first. Right. Not at this stage. You don't have that sort of privilege. Obviously, you're focused on God always. But I think that's going to begin to change. You're going to see that. And then I think communicating about it. Just ask that question. I'm a little worried about this.
Sure.
How does that look? And one of the reasons why I think premarital counseling is so important is when I do premarital counseling for a couple, I say part of the reason is you can ask them the tough questions you were afraid to ask when the two of you are alone. Yep. And you've got kind of a referee here to sort of because you might be afraid to ask that question. Right. And you can ask it here, and probably because you're afraid what the answer will be. Yeah, or if even offending the other. How dare you say that I wouldn't? That kind of a thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. That could be a tough one. If they're worried about that, I mean,
if you're worried about offending them,
well, you know what I'm saying. Like you could be perceived as somehow you're questioning their loyalty to you by just asking this question. Right. I think that's one of the reasons why getting this out of the way first is a part of the discussion.
And I think that having conversations all the time. I remember through 6 years of dating, we were always coming into contact with things and that we would talk about. And it seemed like, why would we be talking about marital stuff when we were dating? But we just, it's like you're poking holes to see what's really underneath. So I think we asked enough questions to each other. Well, how would you deal with that? Oh, look at that parent with the kid that's screaming in the grocery store. How would you do it? How would we? And of course, younger we were judgmental. Then we became parents, and we realized, okay, I get that. But we still would ask questions on how would you do it, or how would I do it, or what do you think? So constantly, again, communication in your dating life will answer some of those questions of maybe what that person's motive may be in the future.
Right. Well, and it will let you find out also things about their family that you might understand why that person is so focused. Maybe it is she's got fantastic parents and she feels like that's her place, and she wants that for herself one day, and so she's focused on learning everything that she can so that she can take that and make her own. So, or maybe it's a controlling situation where she's frozen to do anything on her own.
It could be hard too if you're the young man and you don't have that kind with your family.
That's true.
It's like,
that's true.
I don't even get it. I don't even I don't understand this. So it's a great question, and I think it's sort of it answers or the answer to that is a lot of what we've already talked about is understanding first, expectations up front, communication, and things like that. Well, thanks guys for hanging out with us here. Thanks, Stephanie, and thank you for watching, you guys out there. Hopefully this was helpful, and maybe we'll do. I did get a lot of feedback. People were like, "You got to do a marriage series next." So I said we'll do that as long as Matt is in charge.
Can we make sure that Joel Swan doesn't ask any questions?
Yes.
That's a good way to end off today. No more questions about cheesecake and pie.
Unless you bring us a cheesecake.
Oh.
Then maybe I'll talk about it some more.
Yes.
You mean a tart?
Well said.
We'll have to discuss that.
All right, well, signing off. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great day.